have been if. Do you see?" I nodded. "Dimly. You could see, for instance, what New York would have been like if England had won the Revolution instead of the colonies." "That's the principle true enough, but you couldn't see that on the machine. Part of it, you see, is a Horston psychomat, stolen from one of my ideas, by the way. And you, the user, become part of the device. Your own mind is necessary to furnish the background. For instance, if George Washington could have used the mechanism after the signing of peace, he could have seen what you suggest. We can't. You can't even see what would have happened if I hadn't invented the thing. But I can. Do you understand?" "Of course. You mean the background has to rest in the past experiences of the user." "You're growing brilliant," he scoffed. "Yes, the device will show 10 hours of what would have happened if, condensed, of course, as in a movie, to half an hour's actual time." "Say, that sounds interesting." "You'd like to see it? Is there anything you'd like to find out? Any choice you'd alter?" "I'll say 1,000 of 'em. I'd like to know what would have happened if I'd sold out my stocks in 2009 instead of 10. I was a millionaire in my own right then, but I was a little late in liquidating." "As usual," remarked Van Manderpootz. "Let's go over to the laboratory then." The professor's quarters were but a block from the campus. He ushered me into the physics building and thence into his own research laboratory, much like the one I had visited during my courses under him. The device, he called it his subjunctivizer since it operated in hypothetical worlds, occupied the entire center table. Most of it was merely a Horston psychomat, but glittering crystalline and glassy was the prism of Iceland spar, the polarizing agent that was the heart of the instrument. Van Manderpootz pointed to the headpiece. "Put it on," he said, and I sat staring at the screen of the psychomat. I suppose everyone is familiar with the Horston psychomat. It was as much a fad a few years ago as the Ouija board a century back. Yet it isn't just a toy. Sometimes, much as the Ouija board, it's a real aid to memory. A maze of vague and colored shadows is caused to drift slowly across the screen, and one watches them, meanwhile visualizing whatever scene or circumstances he's trying to remember. He turns a knob that alters the arrangement of lights and shadows, and when by chance the design corresponds to his mental picture, presto, there is his scene recreated under his eyes. Of course, his own mind adds the details. All the screen actually shows are these tinted blobs of light and shadow, but the thing can be amazingly real. I've seen occasions when I could have sworn the psychomat showed pictures almost as sharp and detailed as reality itself. The illusion is sometimes as startling as that. Van Manderpootz switched on the light, and the play of shadows began. "Now recall the circumstances of, say, half a year after the market crash. Turn the knob until the picture clears, then stop. At that point, I direct the light of the subjunctivisor upon the screen, and you have nothing to do but watch." I did as directed. Momentary pictures formed and vanished. The inchoate sounds of the device hummed like distant voices, but without the added suggestion of the picture. They meant nothing. My own face flashed and dissolved, and then finally I had it. There was a picture of myself sitting in an ill-defined room, that was all. I released the knob and gestured. A click followed. The light dimmed, then brightened. The picture cleared, and amazingly another figure emerged, a woman. I recognized her. It was Whimsy White, erstwhile star of television and premiere of the Vision varieties of '09. She was changed on that picture, but I recognized her. I'll say I did. I'd been trailing her all through the boom years of '07 to '10, trying to marry her while old NJ raved and ranted and threatened to leave everything to the Society for the Rehabilitation of the Gobi Desert. I think those threats were what kept her from accepting me, but after I took my own money and ran it up to a couple million in that crazy market of '08 and '09, she softened. Temporarily, that is. When the crash of the spring of '10 came and bounced me back on my father and into the firm of N.J. Wells, her favor dropped a dozen points to the market's 1. In February we were engaged. In April we were hardly speaking. In May they sold me out. I'd been late again. And now there she was on the psychomat screen, obviously plumping out and not nearly so pretty as memory had pictured her. She was staring at me with an expression of enmity, and I was glaring back. The buzzes became voices. "You nitwit," she snapped. "You can't bury me out here. I want to go back to New York where there's a little life. I'm bored with you and your golf." And I'm bored with you and your whole dizzy crowd. At least they're alive. You're a walking corpse. Just because you were lucky enough to gamble yourself into the money, you think you're a tin god. Well, I don't think you're Cleopatra. Those friends of yours, they trail after you because you give parties and spend money. My money. Better than spending it to knock a white walnut along a mountainside. Indeed, you ought to try it, Marie. That was her real name. It might help your figure, though I doubt if anything could. She glared in rage. Well, that was a painful half hour. I won't give all the details, but I was glad when the screen dissolved into meaningless colored clouds. Whew, I said, staring at Van Manderpootz, who had been reading. You liked it? Liked it? Say, I guess I was lucky to be cleaned out. I won't regret it from now on. That, said the professor grandly, is Van Manderpootz's great contribution to human happiness. Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been. True no longer, my friend Dick. Van Manderpootz has shown that the proper reading is, it might have been worse. It was very late when I returned home, and as a result very late when I rose, and equally late when I got to the office. My father was unnecessarily worked up about it, but he exaggerated when he said I'd never been on time. He forgets the occasions when he's awakened me and dragged me down with him, nor was it necessary to refer so sarcastically to my missing the Baikal. I reminded him of the wrecking of the liner, and he responded very heartlessly that if I'd been aboard, the rocket would have been late, and so would have missed colliding with the British fruit ship. It was likewise superfluous for him to mention that when he and I had tried to snatch a few weeks of golfing in the mountains, even the spring had been late. I had nothing to do with that. Dixon, he concluded, you have no conception whatever of time. None whatever. The conversation with Van Manderpootz recurred to me. I was impelled to ask, and have you, sir? I have, he said grimly. I most assuredly have. Time, he said oracularly, is money. You can't argue with a viewpoint like that. But those aspersions of his rankled, especially that about the Baikal. Tardy I might be, but it was hardly conceivable that my presence aboard the rocket could have averted the catastrophe. It irritated me in a way. It made me responsible for the deaths of those unrescued hundreds among the passengers and crew, and I didn't like the thought. Of course, if they'd waited an extra 5 minutes for me, or if I'd been on time and they'd left on schedule instead of 5 minutes late, or if, the word called up Van Manderpootz in his subjunctivizer. The worlds of if, the weird, unreal worlds that existed beside reality, neither past nor future, but contemporary, yet extemporal. Somewhere along their ghostly infinites existed one that represented the world that would have been had I made the liner. I had only to call up Haskell Van Manderpootz, make an appointment, and then find out. Yet it wasn't an easy decision. Just suppose that I found myself responsible. Not legally responsible. Certainly there'd be no question of criminal negligence or anything of that sort. Not even morally responsible, because I couldn't possibly have anticipated that my presence or absence could weigh so heavily in the scales of life and death. Nor could I have known in which direction the scales would tip. Just responsible. That was all. Yet I hated to find out. I hated equally not finding out. Uncertainty has its pangs, too, quite as painful as those of remorse. It might be less nerve-wracking to know myself responsible than to wonder, to waste thoughts in vain doubts and futile reproaches. So I seized the visiphone, dialed the number of the university, and at length gazed upon the broad, humorous, intelligent features of Van Manderpootz, dragged from a morning lecture by my call. I was all but prompt for the appointment the following evening, and might actually have been on time but for an unreasonable traffic officer who insisted on booking me for speeding. At any rate, Van Manderpootz was impressed. "Well," he rumbled, "I almost missed you, Dixon. I was just going over to the club, since I didn't expect you for an hour. You're only 10 minutes late." I ignored this. "Professor, I want to use your subjunctivizer." "Eh? Oh, yes. You're lucky, then. I was just about to dismantle it." "Dismantle it? Why?" "It has served its purpose. It has given birth to an idea far more important than itself. I shall need the space it occupies." "But what is the idea, if it's not too presumptuous of me to ask?" "It's not too presumptuous. You and the world which awaits it so eagerly may both know. But you hear it from the lips of the author. It is nothing less than the autobiography of Van Manderpootz." He paused impressively. I gaped. "Your autobiography?" "Yes. The world, though perhaps unaware, is crying for